Greetings! In this video, I'll be painting an Ultramarines Deimos Pattern Predator, armed with a grav cannon and with Volkite culverins sponsons. I've also put an Astartes Custodian in the top with a pintle-mounted heavy bolter. I primed the model black through my airbrush, then sprayed Macragge blue over most of the model. My first step was an all-over dry brush with Calgar blue. This will build up the highlights quickly, whilst also adding a dusty finish, which can go well with the weathering later. I'm used to painting Astra Militarum vehicles. They have interlocking turrets, and these don't. Next, I started to block in the black bits with Abaddon black. The weapon casings and any recessed panels with greebles sticking out were focused on. At this point I noticed I was missing the cupola hatch. Not sure if I glued it on in the first place, but I got a replacement for my bits box, and I primed it with a few coats of a black marker. I decided to continue with the marker, to base coat a bunch of the larger black bits, like the sponson mounts and the large weapon sections. I switched to the chipping colour marker to paint in the tracks. I'm going to try to do a reversed paint job for the tracks, doing the weathering first and then bringing in the silver back at the end. Speaking of silver, I used dark aluminium to base coat the 4 exhausts on the sides, and the large exhaust at the back. These markers save time, but there's nothing stopping you using a brush if you prefer that. I did a few coats of Macragge blue to paint up the cupola, and whilst I had that blue out, I cleaned up the Custodian's pauldrons a bit. The weathering on him will be more subtle. I glued on the hatch with some liquid cyanoacrylate glue. Any excess was blown into the recesses. That shine that you see will be concealed later. Next, I brought out the Retributor armor to paint in the gold details, particularly on the Custodian's armor trim, but also on select parts of the Predator itself. Onto some decal work now. I used a gloss varnish on the pauldrons, and honestly I probably should have used it for the rest of the decals. You may notice a visible edge on some decals in later footage. I applied some decals that I felt fit. Ultimate glyphs, a fire support tactical marking, and a fancy cloak trim along the turret bustle. After getting those decals applied, I wanted to try using this precision anti-shine to see how it performs. While waiting for that to dry, I went back to the silver marker and painted in the grav cannon. Now for a look at those decals. The edges are prominent on a few, though the anti-shine has helped a little. I think the anti-shine should be kept for small areas. For everything else, I'm thinking that a matte varnish wins here, though this was a small test. Moving back to Abaddon black, I went over the black areas that I painted with the markers. I could have done a second coat with the markers, but I wanted a more precise application. Next, I used Iron Warriors in a similar vein, painting in little silver details, and finishing off where the dark aluminium wasn't precise enough. Onto some red now. Using Mephiston red, I painted in any lenses, including the vision blocks, as well as any buttons and the cables on the Volkite culverins. Next, I highlighted all those sections using Evil Sun Scarlet, painting about 60% of the previous areas in spots that I felt appropriate for shading. To highlight the red further, I brought out Wildrider red, painting about 25% of the area. I kept this for surfaces that would glow, but I also used a tiny bit on the Volkite wires. A final highlight followed with Lugganath Orange, doing about 5% of the glowing surfaces. Onto the copper colours now. I used these three colours to paint Volkite, and today the Grav Cannon as well. Starting with Tinny Tin, I base coated all the bits I wanted copper. This serves as a good base coat for the remainder, only a tiny bit of this will show through. Next, I used hammered copper, going over the vast majority of the previously applied Tinny Tin. Some shadows in the recesses from the previous colour are kept. Finally, model colour copper was used, going over about 50% of the surfaces, leaving a bit of the transition between them. I really like this combination. Next, I used Seraphim Sepia to shade the gold metallics, though I also used it in some small areas of the copper too. This gives the copper a slight tarnishing effect. Now for some edge highlighting with Mechanicus Standard Grey. Pretty simple, just going over the edges of the black bits that are obvious enough to warrant it. Now moving on to the Grav Cannon glow itself. I started by base coating the rod caps with Cabalite Green. To highlight, I used Cyberite Green, doing about 75% of the rounded shape. I finished off with Gulf's Blaster Green, doing about 25%. Now back to the blue. I went back to Calgar Blue and did a manual edge highlight along a bunch of the edges that I felt didn't get enough from the dry brush. I also started with a weathering pass. This includes little scratches, chips and cuts along surfaces that I felt would impact either terrain as it passes by, rough foliage, or impacts from shrapnel or small arms fire. To help break up the sea of blue, I decided to paint all the rivets with Runefang steel. I also used this to highlight any upwards facing metallic surfaces, like on the weapons and the exhausts. Onto the lamps now, starting with Averland Sunset as a simple base coat. It takes a few thin coats to get full coverage. Next, I used Aerial Yellow to bump up the brightness. I wanted these lights to be visible but not glowing, so I didn't go any further with highlights. I did, however, use some Troll Slayer Orange to dot in the little indicator lamp. Onto some enamels finally, this time going over most of the model with a Sepia Paneliner from AK Interactive. I'm really pushing the limits for this thing. I'm using it as a quicker version of their normal enamel paints here. I applied it heavily over the tracks, and I also did some splashes by flicking it over a toothpick, though I didn't manage to get any footage of that on camera. Sticking with the enamels for now, I switched to the black panel liner, went over the black metallics, and anywhere that looked like it was a deep vent. Wanting some colour variation in the enamel, I switched to the dark brown panel liner, which is more of a red-brown when compared to the sepia. I used this sparingly over the model, applying it in a way that I felt complemented the previous applications. Now to finish the tracks. I used some Runefang steel and dry brushed the tracks. It's important to let the enamel fully dry before doing this. I had forgotten to paint the silver grille on the lamps, so I went back and painted those with Runefang steel, then went back to the sepia panel liner to shine around the edges of the grille. Finally, I went in with Rhinox hide and painted a bunch of deeper cuts and scratches onto the existing Calgar blue scratches. This combination adds some really nice depth that helps the scratches stand out against the otherwise smooth armour. After I was happy with the weathering, I went in with an ultramatte varnish to seal everything in and standardise the shine present on the model. If you don't have an airbrush to do this, you can use Munitorum varnish spray. Just be aware of the temperature and humidity requirements for that thing. And here we have it, a Deimos Pattern Predator of the 13th Legion, the Ultramarines. This was a personal project that I felt worth recording. Please ignore the dog hair that seems to have found a home on the rear left of the vehicle. I'm really happy with the result, and I think the tracks came out good despite the experimental approach I took. Maybe a darker silver would look better though, for the dry brushing pass. I really like the final result on the Volkite culverins. Volkite in general looks really cool, but I love when there's some bright copper tones in there, contrasting against the black. The weathering was fun, and I think the result's pretty good, especially around the cupola and the bottom of the turret sides. I'd like to do some vehicles from other chapters or legions in the future, but it's quite the cost investment. I'll see what I can come up with though. Let me know in the comments what you'd like to see. No promises for vehicles like these, but I'm still interested to see what you guys have to say. Anyway, that's all I have for this video. Hope you stick around for the next one.